I just want to check my balance, I said as a maid. The millionaire mocked me until the screen said otherwise. They laughed when I asked to check my bank balance. He smirked like I was a child asking to sit at the grown-ups table. Maybe you're working for someone who never says thank you or cleaning up while everyone else sleeps. Tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Gloria Martinez and I'm 58 years old. Every morning at 5:30, I slip into the same faded navy uniform that's seen better days. The fabric feels rough against my skin, stiffened by years of industrial washing machines and bleach that never quite fades, the stains of other people's lives. My fingers are permanently cracked from scrubbing floors before the sun rises over Chicago's skyline. The Willis Tower gleams in the distance, but from the basement laundry room of this Gold Coast mansion, I can barely see it through the tiny window. The scent of freshly ground Ethiopian coffee beans drifts down from the kitchen above my head. Mrs. Victoria Castile insists on the finest things. Her coffee costs more per pound than I make in a week, but I'm never invited to taste it. Instead, I kneel on these cold marble floors at dawn, polishing the imported Italian table where their Limoges china sits untouched, waiting for a breakfast I'll prepare but never share. That Tuesday morning in March, my hands weren't trembling from exhaustion or arthritis. They shook because of a text message that had arrived on my cracked flip phone the night before. The screen was so damaged I had to squint to read the words that would haunt me. Don't expect your usual birthday dinner invitation this year, Gloria. Remember your place. You're just the help. It was signed simply VC, Mrs. Victoria Castile, wife of tech mogul Harrison Castile, whose fortune in cryptocurrency and stock market investments had made him one of Chicago's wealthiest men. I stared at that message until the screen went black. In all my 16 years working for this family, I had never missed preparing their elaborate dinner parties. I'd cooked for senators, movie stars, and business tycoons who discussed Bitcoin portfolios over wine that cost more than my monthly salary. And tomorrow was my 58th birthday, a day I'd foolishly hoped might be different. The hurt cut deeper than any winter wind off Lake Michigan. I had allowed myself to imagine that my years of silent loyalty had built something resembling affection, maybe even gratitude. I thought I'd earned a place at their table, even if just for one special day, but expectation crumbled into the familiar taste of swallowed pride. How many times had I cleaned up after their parties, listening to them toast their success while I remained invisible in the kitchen? How many nights had I fallen asleep on my thin mattress in the basement, dreaming that maybe, just maybe, they saw me as more than furniture that happened to move and clean? That morning, as I polished their family portrait in the grand hallway, I studied their faces. Harrison with his silver hair and $1,000 suits, Victoria with her salon-perfect smile, their two grown children who visited only when they needed money or emotional support. In this gilded frame, they looked like America's perfect family, but I wasn't in the picture. I never was. 16 years ago, I left everything behind in New Orleans. My daughter Carmen was only 5 then, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile that lit up our tiny apartment in the 9th Ward. The hurricane damage had cost us everything, and Chicago seemed like a golden opportunity. "I'll send money back," I promised her, holding her small face in my hands. "Mama will make enough to give you everything you deserve." What I didn't know was that everything would cost me every milestone in her life. I missed her first school recital where she played a sunflower in the spring play. I wasn't there when she got her period at 12 or when boys broke her heart at 16. Instead of mother-daughter shopping trips, I sent photographs of expensive designer clothes I'd seen in the Castiles' closets. Instead of bedtime stories, I mailed postcards with Chicago landmarks I'd only seen on my rare days off. "You're so lucky to have steady work," Victoria would say when she remembered I existed. "A roof over your head, regular meals. Some people would kill for your situation." lucky. That word followed me everywhere, whispered by relatives who envied my steady paycheck, repeated by neighbors who thought I'd found the American dream. But this mansion was never my home. It was a beautiful prison where I existed in the shadows. My bedroom was a converted storage space in the basement next to the furnace that clanged and wheezed through Chicago's brutal winters. The walls were cinder block painted institutional green, and the single window looked out onto the alley where garbage trucks rumbled past at dawn. The Castile family lived 3 floors above me in rooms I cleaned but never lingered in. Harrison's home office contained monitors displaying his stock portfolio, numbers that made my head spin. I'd dust around his trading setup while CNBC played commentary on cryptocurrency markets and investment dividends. His net worth fluctuated more in a day than I'd earn in a decade. Victoria's walk-in closet was larger than most people's bedrooms, filled with designer gowns that cost more than my yearly salary. She had shoes for every occasion, jewelry stored in temperature-controlled cases, and handbags arranged by color and season. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in her full-length mirrors and hardly recognize the woman staring back. Gray-haired, stooped, wearing clothes that had seen too many years of harsh detergent and hopeful mending. "Gloria, the chandelier better sparkle for tonight's dinner," Victoria would call down the stairs without bothering to look at me. "Make sure you use the good crystal. Senator Morrison is coming, and I won't have him think we're casual about entertaining." Those were the conversations that passed for warmth between us, commands disguised as requests, orders delivered with the expectation of grateful compliance. I wonder now if she ever saw me as a person with feelings, dreams, fears. Or was I simply a useful machine that required occasional maintenance in the form of a paycheck and leftovers? The small wounds accumulated like paper cuts, individually minor but collectively devastating. My paychecks often arrived late, sometimes with mysterious deductions. "Administrative fees," Harrison's accountant would explain when I asked. Meanwhile, I'd overhear conversations about their latest investment gains, their expanding stock portfolio, their plans to diversify into international markets. Once, their youngest son, Marcus, accused me of being too friendly with male guests at a party. The implication hung in the air like smoke, poisoning any innocent interaction. I was 55 years old, widowed, worn down by years of service, but in his eyes, I was still a threat that needed managing. After that, I made myself even smaller, even quieter, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might misinterpret my basic human decency as something inappropriate. When I caught pneumonia 2 winters ago, there were no flowers, no concern, no suggestion that I rest until I recovered. Victoria simply hired a temporary replacement and docked my pay for the days I couldn't work. I spent a week in my basement room, shivering under thin blankets, wondering if anyone would notice if I simply didn't wake up one morning. Recovery was slower than it should have been. I returned to work weak and hollow-cheeked, but the floors still needed scrubbing and the laundry still needed folding. That's when I began to understand the true nature of my position. I was valued exactly as much as the work I could produce, no more, no less. One gray afternoon in November, I was carrying a tray of Victoria's finest china when my arthritic hands betrayed me. The tray slipped, and centuries of European craftsmanship shattered against the Italian marble. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and Victoria's scream brought everyone running. $40,000, she shrieked, gesturing at the fragments. "That set belonged to my grandmother. It's irreplaceable." As I knelt to collect the pieces, cutting my fingers on the edges, something inside me shattered too. I looked up at the family portrait hanging above the fireplace, all those perfect faces smiling down at their perfect life. And I wasn't in the picture. I was never in any of their pictures. What would happen, I whispered to myself that night, if I just walked away? The thought terrified me. After 16 years, This basement room and this demanding routine had become my entire world. Where would I go? How would I survive? What skills did I have beyond cleaning and cooking and staying invisible? But the whisper grew louder over the following weeks. I began to move differently, speak differently. When Victoria snapped orders, I responded with single-word answers instead of my usual apologetic explanations. When Harrison complained about his coffee temperature, I simply poured a fresh cup without the elaborate apologies he'd come to expect. The family noticed. How could they not? The woman who had bent herself into impossible shapes to accommodate their every whim was suddenly resistant. Not rebellious, not confrontational, but no longer infinitely flexible. "You've been different lately," Victoria observed one morning, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Distant, cold, after everything we've done for you." Everything they'd done for me. I almost laughed. They'd given me work, yes. They'd provided shelter, a basement room that flooded every spring when the snow melted. They'd paid me wages, always late, often less than promised, but technically sufficient to keep me alive and working. But they'd never given me dignity. They'd never offered friendship. They'd never once asked about my daughter, Carmen, growing up hundreds of miles away without her mother. They'd never wondered if I had dreams beyond their laundry and their spotless floors. Their grown children, Sarah and Marcus, began visiting more frequently. Both lived in expensive downtown condos, funded by trust funds and family connections. Sarah worked in her father's investment firm, managing portfolios while complaining about the stress of deciding between summer homes in the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard. Marcus had started his own tech company with Harrison's capital, developing apps for cryptocurrency trading. During one particularly tense family dinner I was serving, Sarah leaned over to her mother and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Why is she acting so weird lately? Maybe it's time to find someone younger, someone more grateful." Grateful. There was that word again, wielded like a weapon to keep me in line. I was supposed to be grateful for the privilege of scrubbing their toilets, washing their underwear, listening to their complain about problems that money could easily solve. But something had shifted in my heart. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of invisible service. Maybe it was the realization that Carmen was now 21, an adult I barely knew, raised by my sister while I cleaned other people's homes. Maybe it was simply exhaustion from carrying other people's burdens while my own dreams suffocated in that basement room. That's when Mario Ramirez entered my story like a breath of fresh air. He worked as a gardener for the neighbors, the Hendersons, and I'd see him tending their roses when I took the garbage to the alley. Mario was about my age, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Unlike everyone in the Castile household, he looked at me when he spoke. He saw me as a person, not a service provider. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Senora?" he'd say in accented English, tipping his worn baseball cap. We'd exchange pleasantries about the weather, the changing seasons, the small joys that keep working people sane. Gradually, our conversations grew longer. Mario would share stories about his grandchildren in Mexico, and I found myself talking about Carmen, really talking about her, for the first time in years. He didn't judge me for the choices I'd made. He didn't suggest I was lucky to have steady work. He simply listened with the kind of attention I'd forgotten existed. "You have strong hands," he said one afternoon, watching me hang laundry on the clothesline behind the mansion. "Hands that have worked hard for good reasons. Your daughter, she must be proud." I hadn't cried in years. There's no time for tears when you're constantly serving others. But Mario's simple kindness broke something loose inside me. Standing there among the Castile's expensive linens, I wept for all the years I'd spent making myself smaller, quieter, less significant. "I don't think she even remembers me," I confessed. "I've been away so long, sending money but missing everything that mattered." Mario nodded with understanding. "Sometimes we sacrifice our present for our children's future. But maybe now it's time to find balance, Senora. To remember that you matter too." His words planted seeds in my tired heart. For the first time in 16 years, I began to consider that my life might contain possibilities beyond this mansion, beyond this family that had never truly seen me. The change started small. Instead of automatically sending half my paycheck to New Orleans every month, I kept a few extra dollars. I bought myself a real coffee at the Starbucks near the grocery store, not the instant crystals I'd been drinking in my basement room. I sat at a window table and watched people hurry past on North Michigan Avenue, all of them with lives and stories that had nothing to do with the Castile family. That coffee tasted like freedom. The next week, instead of spending my one day off doing extra tasks around the mansion, I rode the L train to Lincoln Park Zoo. I hadn't been anywhere purely for pleasure. In so long I'd forgotten how it felt to walk without purpose, to observe without cleaning, to exist without serving. Children laughed at the monkey exhibit while their parents took pictures. Couples held hands by the pond. Elderly men fed pigeons while discussing baseball scores. Normal people living normal lives, connected to each other in ways that had nothing to do with money or servitude. That's when I decided to do something that had seemed impossible for 16 years. I would skip sending money home for 1 month, just once. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it stirred something I barely recognized, the beginning of self-respect. Carmen called that weekend, her voice tight with worry. "Mama, where's the money? Is everything okay? Did something happen?" How could I explain that something had happened? Not a crisis, but an awakening. How could I tell my daughter that her mother was finally learning to value herself? "Carmen, mija," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something. Would you rather have a mother who sends money from far away, or a mother who comes home and builds a life with you?" The silence stretched across the miles between Chicago and New Orleans. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "I just want my mama back. We can figure out everything else together." Those words gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. My daughter wanted her mother more than she wanted my money. After 21 years, she was still waiting for me to choose her over obligation, love over duty. But the Castile family noticed my subtle rebellion immediately. Victoria's voice grew sharper when addressing me. Harrison began checking my work with microscopic attention, finding faults that had never mattered before. Their adult children visited more often, creating extra work while complaining about my attitude problem. "You've been ungrateful lately," Victoria announced one morning, cornering me in the laundry room. "After everything this family has done for you, we gave you a home when you had nothing. We trusted you with our most valuable possessions. And this is how you repay us?" I looked at her perfectly styled blonde hair, her manicured nails that had never scrubbed a toilet or scoured a pan. Her jewelry probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, and she was lecturing me about gratitude. "Mrs. Castile," I said quietly, "I've worked for your family for 16 years. I've missed my daughter's childhood to take care of your home. I've given you the best years of my life. What more would you like me to be grateful for?" Her eyes widened in shock. The maid had talked back. The invisible woman had found her voice. "I think you need to remember your place," she hissed. "There are hundreds of women who would be thrilled to have your position." "Then perhaps," I replied, surprising myself with my calm tone, "you should hire one of them." The confrontation left me shaking, but also oddly exhilarated. I had spoken my truth without apologizing, without begging for understanding. For the first time in 16 years, I had treated myself like a person who mattered. That afternoon, I did something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. I walked to the Chase Bank branch on West Division Street and asked to speak with a teller about my account balance. My hands shook as I presented my identification, expecting to see the usual disappointing numbers that barely covered my basic expenses. Harrison Castile happened to be conducting business at the same bank, something about diversifying his cryptocurrency holdings and adjusting his stock portfolio before the quarterly dividend reports. He was surrounded by bank officers treating him like royalty, all of them eager to help manage his vast fortune. When he spotted me standing in the regular customer line, his expression shifted from surprise to amusement to something that looked like contempt. He whispered something to his personal banker, and they both chuckled. "Gloria!" Harrison called out loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Checking your balance? That's adorable. What could you possibly have saved on a maid's salary? $20? $50?" The entire bank fell silent. Other customers turned to stare at the wealthy man mocking his elderly employee. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, but I didn't run. I didn't apologize. I simply waited for the teller to process my request. "Here's your balance statement, ma'am," the young teller said professionally, handing me the printed receipt. I looked at the numbers and felt my knees nearly buckle. The account showed $847,000. For a moment, I thought there had been a mistake. But then I remembered the letter I'd received 3 months earlier from Harrison's former financial advisor, David Chen. David had been fired for supposedly mismanaging client portfolios, but before he left, he'd sent me a cryptic message about accounts that needed attention and clerical errors that favored the wrong parties. Years earlier, when the Castile's assets were being reorganized for tax purposes, someone had accidentally opened an investment account in my name instead of Victoria's. The account had been funded with $50,000 and set to automatically reinvest dividends from Harrison's diversified stock portfolio. For 12 years, this account had been quietly growing, earning compound interest while Harrison's team of financial managers assumed it belonged to one of their many subsidiary holdings. David Chen had discovered the error during his final audit, but decided not to report it to Harrison. Instead, he'd notified me, the woman whose decades of loyal service had gone unacknowledged and financially undercompensated. I folded the balance statement and placed it carefully in my purse. When I looked up, Harrison was staring at me with confusion and growing suspicion. "Well," he demanded, "how much does the help have saved up? Enough for a nice dinner at McDonald's?" I walked slowly across the bank's marble floor until I stood directly in front of him. The other customers and bank employees watched in fascination as the maid prepared to address the millionaire. "Mr. Castile," I said clearly, "I have enough." Without another word, I turned and walked out of that bank like a queen leaving her palace. The power dynamic in the Castile household shifted overnight. Harrison spent hours on the phone with his lawyers and accountants, trying to understand how nearly $1 million of his investment gains had ended up in his maid's name. But the account had been legally established, properly managed, and all transactions were documented and legitimate. Victoria's treatment of me grew increasingly desperate and manipulative. One morning, she burst into my basement room without knocking, tears streaming down her carefully applied makeup. "Gloria, darling," she sobbed, "I've been thinking about how much you mean to this family. You're not just our housekeeper. You're like a mother to me. I was hoping we could talk about making some changes. Maybe it's time we gave you a raise, made your living situation more comfortable." Darling. Mother. After 16 years of being treated like animated furniture, I was suddenly family. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Castile?" "Well," she smiled through her tears, "Harrison and I were thinking we could renovate the guest room upstairs for you. New furniture, your own bathroom, maybe even a small television, and of course, we'd need to discuss a significant salary increase." She was offering me everything I dreamed of during those long, cold nights in the basement. A real room with windows and dignity, financial security, the recognition I'd craved for so long. But her timing revealed the truth. This generosity wasn't born from affection or gratitude. It was calculated damage control. They wanted to keep me close so they could monitor my newfound financial independence, maybe even find legal ways to reclaim what they considered stolen wealth. "That's very generous," I replied carefully. "But I've been thinking it might be time for a change in my life, too." Victoria's tears dried instantly. Change? What kind of change? I've been away from my daughter for 16 years. Maybe it's time I went home to New Orleans and tried to rebuild that relationship. You can visit Louisiana any time, she said quickly. But this is your home now. We're your family. You belong here with people who appreciate everything you do. Appreciate. Family. Belong. Words they'd never used before I gained financial independence. Mrs. Castile, I said gently, if I was family, why was I never invited to your dinner table? If you appreciated me, why was my paycheck always late? If I belonged here, why did I sleep in a basement room for 16 years? She had no answer for those questions. The next few weeks brought a parade of bribes disguised as belated recognition. Harrison offered to help me invest my money more aggressively, suggesting we could be partners in future business ventures. Sarah and Marcus suddenly remembered my existence, visiting with flowers and awkward compliments about my invaluable contribution to their childhood. But the most heartbreaking manipulation came from the people I'd helped raise. Sarah, now 28, sat in my basement room crying about how much she'd miss me if I left. You were more of a mother to me than my own mother sometimes, she wept dramatically. Do you remember when I had that terrible fever when I was 7? You stayed up all night taking care of me. Mom was at a charity gala, but you were there. I did remember that night. Sarah's temperature had spiked to 103 degrees, and Victoria had refused to cancel her social engagements. I'd held that little girl until dawn, giving her medicine and singing lullabies in Spanish, the same songs I'd sung to Carmen before I left New Orleans. You were always there when we needed you, Sarah continued. For every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every crisis. We never properly thanked you for that, but we can make up for it now. We can be a real family. Her words were designed to rewrite history, to transform years of neglect into a story of understated affection. She wanted me to believe that their failure to see me as human had actually been love in disguise. Sarah, I said quietly, if I was like a mother to you, why am I still sleeping in the basement? She didn't have an answer for that either. The final manipulation came from Harrison himself. He cornered me in the kitchen one morning while I was preparing breakfast, his voice dropping to the confidential tone he used during business negotiations. Gloria, I've been thinking about our conversation at the bank. That money in your account, technically it belongs to you now. The lawyers have made that clear. But surely you understand that it came from my investments, my financial expertise, my market decisions. I continued slicing fruit while he spoke, keeping my hand steady despite the sick feeling in my stomach. I'm not asking you to return it, he continued smoothly, but I am hoping we can work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe you could invest it through my financial firm. I could help you turn that money into something really substantial. We could be partners instead of employer and employee. Partners. After 16 years of treating me like property, he wanted to be partners. Mr. Castile, I said without looking up from the cutting board, I think I'll manage my own finances from now on. His friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You don't understand high finance, Gloria. You're a cleaning lady. That money will be gone within a year if you don't invest it properly. Maybe, I agreed, but it will be gone because of my choices, not yours. That afternoon, I called Carmen in New Orleans. My daughter was working as a nurse's aide while finishing her degree in social work. She lived in a small apartment in the Garden District, struggling to pay rent while dreaming of helping children caught in the same cycle of poverty that had separated us so many years ago. Mija, I said, how would you feel about your mama coming home? The silence stretched so long I thought the connection had failed. Then Carmen's voice came through the phone, broken and hopeful. Are you serious, Mama? Really serious? I have some money saved up, I told her. Enough for us to start fresh. Maybe I could help you finish school. Maybe we could find a little house together, learn how to be a family again. Carmen's sobs echoed across the miles. I've been waiting for you to come home for 16 years, Mama. I never stopped waiting. That conversation gave me the courage I needed for what came next. I requested a family meeting in the Castile's formal living room, a space I'd cleaned thousands of times but never sat in as an equal. Harrison, Victoria, Sarah, and Marcus arranged themselves on the imported Italian furniture, confused by this unprecedented summons from their maid. I wanted to let you know, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart, that I'll be leaving Chicago next month. I'm going home to Louisiana to spend time with my daughter. Victoria's face cycled through surprise, anger, and calculated sweetness. Gloria, honey, we've talked about this. This is your home now. We're your family. We've been discussing ways to make your life here more comfortable. You've been very generous with your recent offers, I replied diplomatically, but I've made my decision. This is about the money, isn't it? Harrison's voice carried an edge of accusation. You think that account makes you independent, but you don't understand the complexities of wealth management. You'll be back here within 6 months, broke and begging for your job. His certainty was almost impressive. Even now, facing my resignation, he couldn't imagine that I might have legitimate reasons for leaving beyond financial delusion. Mr. Castile, I said calmly, this isn't about money. It's about family, my real family. The daughter I left behind when she was 5 years old, who's now 21 and needs her mother. We need you too, Sarah interjected desperately. More than she does. She's an adult who barely knows you, but we've been your family for 16 years. The irony was staggering. After treating me like an appliance for over a decade, they were suddenly claiming deep emotional bonds that had never been acknowledged or reciprocated. Sarah, I said gently, if I was your family, I would have been included in family photos. I would have sat at your dinner table. I would have been invited to your wedding last year, instead of working in the kitchen while you celebrated. Marcus tried a different approach. Look, Gloria, I get it. You want to see your daughter. But why leave permanently? Take a vacation, spend some time with her, then come back. We'll hold your position. Because, I said simply, I want to be more than a position. I want to be a mother. The room fell silent. For the first time in 16 years, I had spoken my complete truth without apology or qualification. Victoria made one final attempt at manipulation. You're making a terrible mistake. That girl is a stranger to you now. You think blood is enough to build a relationship after all these years? We're the ones who know you, who understand your value. I stood up from the velvet armchair, smoothing down my worn skirt, and looked at each of their faces. Faces I'd seen every day for 16 years, faces that had never truly seen me in return. Mrs. Castile, I said quietly, you know my cleaning schedule and my social security number. You know how to use my labor and skills, but you don't know my middle name, my favorite color, or my daughter's dreams. You've never asked what I wanted from life or what I feared losing. You know how to value my work, but you've never valued me as a person. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the house keys they'd given me years ago. Keys that had felt like symbols of trust, but had actually been tools of containment. I'm returning these today, I said, placing them on the coffee table I'd polished countless times. I'll work through the end of the month to give you time to find a replacement. Without waiting for their response, I walked out of that living room with my dignity intact and my future in my own hands. The remaining weeks in Chicago passed in a strange mixture of routine and revolutionary change. I continued my daily tasks while quietly planning my escape from a life that had never really belonged to me. The Castile family treated me with the careful politeness they might show a dangerous stranger, recognizing that I was no longer under their control, but uncertain about how to relate to me as an equal. Victoria made passive-aggressive comments about my abandonment of people who had given me everything. Harrison alternated between dismissive predictions about my financial ruin and barely concealed anger about the investment account that had slipped through his legal grasp. Sarah and Marcus avoided me entirely, perhaps embarrassed by their transparent attempts at emotional manipulation. But their rejection no longer wounded me. I was too busy planning a future that belonged entirely to me. I spent my evenings in that basement room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and 16 years of accumulated possessions. Most of my belongings were practical items: uniforms, cleaning supplies, the basic necessities of a woman whose life had been dedicated to maintaining other people's comfort. But tucked away in the back of my closet, I found treasures I'd forgotten: photographs Carmen had sent over the years, school reports and graduation announcements, drawings she'd made as a child and mailed to her absent mother. Holding those pictures, I could see how my daughter had grown from a gap-toothed kindergartner into a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and her father's stubborn chin. I'd missed her quinceañera, her high school graduation, her first job, her first heartbreak. But it wasn't too late to be present for what came next. Mario the gardener helped me load my few belongings into the ancient Honda Civic I'd been driving for 12 years. As we worked in the alley behind the mansion, he asked the question that had been haunting me. "Are you scared, Senora?" I considered his words while we lifted boxes into the trunk. Was I scared? Absolutely. I was 58 years old, leaving the only stable life I'd known in nearly 2 decades. I was returning to a daughter who had grown up without me, to a city I barely remembered, to start over with nothing but money I'd never expected to have. "Yes, Mario," I admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm more scared of staying the same than I am of changing." He nodded with understanding. "My grandmother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something else is more important than your fear." Something else was more important than my fear. Love. The love I owed my daughter, the love I owed myself, the love I'd been too tired and beaten down to believe I deserved. On my last morning in Chicago, I stood in the Castile Mansion's grand foyer one final time. 16 years of my life were contained in these rooms, 16 years of invisible service, swallowed pride, and dreams deferred. But also 16 years that had taught me resilience, taught me the difference between genuine kindness and calculated manipulation, taught me that my worth wasn't determined by other people's recognition. I left a letter for the family on Harrison's desk, written on simple notebook paper in my careful handwriting. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Castile, thank you for 16 years of steady employment. I hope you find someone who can serve your household needs with the dedication you deserve. I am grateful for the work experience and life lessons this position provided. I wish your family health and happiness. Respectfully, Gloria Martinez." No accusations, no bitterness, no detailed catalog of hurts and disappointments. Just professional courtesy from a woman who had learned to choose dignity over revenge. The drive to New Orleans took 14 hours. With stops for gas and coffee, and the growing excitement that bubbled up every mile. I played the radio loud for the first time in years, singing along to songs I'd forgotten I loved. The Honda's air conditioning had failed somewhere in Mississippi, but I didn't care. I rolled down the windows and let the humid southern air wash over me like a baptism. Carmen was waiting on her apartment's front steps when I pulled up, just as she'd promised. She looked so much like my mother. The same proud posture, the same expressive hands, the same eyes that could see straight through pretense to the truth beneath. But she was also herself, a woman I was just beginning to know. My daughter, who had grown up strong and compassionate despite my absence. We held each other on that sidewalk for a long time, both of us crying years of accumulated grief and relief. Neighbors came out onto their porches to witness the reunion, and several elderly women whispered blessings in Spanish and French. The garden district had changed since I'd lived there, but the essential spirit remained. A community that celebrated family connections and understood the weight of sacrifice. "Mama," Carmen whispered into my shoulder, "I was so afraid you wouldn't really come." "Mia," I whispered back, "I should have come home years ago." That first month together was a delicate dance of rediscovery. We were strangers who shared blood and history but needed to learn each other's adult selves. Carmen showed me around her neighborhood, introduced me to her friends, brought me to the hospital where she worked with elderly patients who reminded me of my former invisible existence. We rented a small 2-bedroom house near Tulane University, close enough for Carmen to finish her social work degree without the crushing financial stress that had been weighing her down. The house had a front porch with rocking chairs, a kitchen window that looked out onto a garden where I could plant tomatoes and herbs, and enough space for both of us to exist without crowding each other's dreams. For the first time in 16 years, I woke up in the morning and asked myself what I wanted to do with my day. The question felt foreign, almost dangerous. I'd been so trained to anticipate other people's needs that my own desires had atrophied from neglect. Carmen helped me remember. "What did you love before you went to Chicago, Mama? What made you happy when you were young?" I had loved cooking, not the elaborate meals required by the Castigli's dinner parties, but simple, soulful food that brought families together. I had loved gardening, watching seeds transform into nourishment. I had loved reading, back when I had time for books that weren't cleaning manuals or household management guides. So I began to reclaim those forgotten pieces of myself. I planted a small garden behind our house, growing the vegetables and flowers that reminded me of my childhood in rural Louisiana. I enrolled in a community college cooking class, learning techniques I'd never had time to master while serving other people's meals. I discovered the public library and lost myself in novels that had nothing to do with domestic service or wealthy families. But the most healing activity was volunteering at a local community center that served working mothers, women who, like I had been, were struggling to balance survival with dreams. I helped with childcare during evening classes, taught basic cooking skills, and sometimes just listened to women who needed someone to see their exhaustion and validate their sacrifices. "You understand us," one young mother told me after I'd spent an evening watching her toddler while she attended a job training seminar. "You know what it's like to give everything for your children and still feel like it's not enough." I did understand. But I also understood something I wished I could have told my younger self, that sometimes the best thing you can give your children is a mother who knows her own worth. Carmen and I began building new traditions to replace the years we'd lost. Sunday dinners where we cooked together, trying recipes from our family's history. Saturday morning walks through the French Quarter, sharing stories and dreams. Evening conversations on the front porch, watching neighbors tend their own gardens and family relationships. "Tell me about Chicago," Carmen would say sometimes, and I'd share carefully selected stories. The beautiful architecture, the bitter winters, the way Lake Michigan looked like an ocean when you stood on the shore. I didn't tell her about the basement room, the 16 years of invisibility, the daily humiliations that had nearly convinced me I deserved nothing better. She didn't need to inherit the burden of my pain. Instead, I wanted to give her the gift of my recovery, the example of a woman who had learned to value herself even after decades of being undervalued by others. 6 months after leaving Chicago, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice was familiar but strained. Sarah Castile, the young woman I'd helped raise, calling from her downtown condo. "Gloria?" she said hesitantly. "I hope it's okay that I called. I got your number from Mom's address book." My chest tightened with old anxiety, but I kept my voice neutral. "Hello, Sarah. How are you?" She paused, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I'm pregnant and scared, and I keep thinking about how you took care of me when I was little. How you always knew exactly what to do when I was sick or frightened." The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that Sarah was facing motherhood herself, she finally understood what she'd witnessed during her childhood, a woman sacrificing her own maternal relationships to care for other people's children. "Congratulations on your pregnancy," I said gently. "That's wonderful news." "Is it?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I don't know how to be a mother. My own mother was never really present. She was always busy with charity events and social obligations. The person who actually raised me was you, and I treated you terribly when you left. We all did." I sat in my kitchen, looking out at the garden where my tomatoes were beginning to ripen, and felt something I hadn't expected: compassion for the young woman who had manipulated me just months earlier. "Sarah," I said carefully, "parenting is something you learn by doing, and by making mistakes, and by loving your child more than your fear. Could I—" She hesitated. "Could I visit sometime? To see how you're doing, but also to ask for advice. I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you after how we treated you, but I don't know who else would understand what I'm going through." The request touched something deep in my heart, not the old, destructive need to serve others at my own expense, but genuine care for a young woman I had helped raise. Sarah wasn't asking me to resume my role as invisible caretaker. She was asking for the wisdom I'd gained from my own journey through motherhood and sacrifice. "You can visit," I told her, "but as a friend, not as someone who owes you anything, and you'll pay for your own plane ticket." She laughed through her tears. "Deal." Sarah's visit a month later was awkward at first, then surprisingly healing. She was humbled by my modest house, amazed by the garden I'd cultivated, curious about my new life in ways she'd never been curious about my interior experiences when I worked for her family. Carmen was initially suspicious of this privileged young woman from my past, but Sarah's genuine remorse and vulnerability won her over. The three of us spent an afternoon cooking together, Sarah learning to make my mother's gumbo recipe, while Carmen shared stories about growing up without her mother, but never losing hope for our reunion. "I never understood what you gave up to take care of us," Sarah admitted as we stirred the roux. "I thought you lived with us because you wanted to, not because you needed the work. I thought you stayed in the basement because you preferred privacy, not because we never offered you anything better." "I survived," I replied simply, "and surviving taught me things I needed to know about resilience and self-worth. I'm not angry about the past, Sarah. I'm grateful for the present." Before she left, Sarah asked one more question. "Are you happy now, Gloria? Really happy?" I considered her question while I walked her to the taxi that would take her to the airport. Was I happy? My life was smaller now, quieter, less financially secure than it had seemed during those final months in Chicago. I had no staff to manage, no elaborate meals to plan, no wealthy family whose reflected status might make me feel important. But I woke up every morning in my own bed, in my own house, planning my own day. I had conversations with my daughter where I shared my thoughts and feelings instead of just listening to others' problems. I volunteered my time by choice rather than obligation, helping people who appreciated my presence rather than taking it for granted. "Yes," I told Sarah, "I'm happy. Maybe for the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely happy." A year after leaving Chicago, Carmen graduated from college with a degree in social work and a job offer from the same community center where I volunteered. We celebrated at a small restaurant in the French Quarter, toasting her achievement with champagne I could afford to buy without calculating how many hours of labor it represented. "I want to work with families like ours," Carmen told me over dinner. "Parents who get separated by economic necessity, children who grow up wondering why work was more important than love. I want to help create support systems so fewer families have to make the choices we made." Looking at my daughter, confident, educated, committed to healing rather than perpetuating cycles of abandonment, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with other people's approval. This was the dream I'd been chasing during all those years in Chicago. Raising a child who could build the kind of life that nourished relationships rather than destroying them. But Carmen surprised me with her next announcement, and I want to use some of your money to start a scholarship fund for domestic workers' children. for kids whose parents are sacrificing their presence to provide financial stability. The generosity of her vision took my breath away. She wanted to transform my unexpected windfall into something that could spare other families the pain we'd endured. "Mija," I said, tears streaming down my face, "that's the most beautiful idea I've ever heard." We did establish that scholarship fund, working with lawyers and accountants to create something legitimate and sustainable. The Gloria Martinez Educational Foundation provides financial assistance to children of domestic workers, along with mentorship programs and family counseling services designed to strengthen bonds that economic pressure threatens to break. Our first scholarship recipient was Maria Santos, a 17-year-old whose mother cleaned offices in downtown New Orleans. Maria wanted to study nursing but couldn't afford college tuition without leaving school to work full-time. The scholarship allowed her to pursue her education while her mother continued supporting their family, without the generational sacrifice that had defined my own choices. At the scholarship ceremony, Maria's mother approached me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said in accented English, "but you saved my family. My daughter won't have to choose between her dreams and her love for me." Standing in that community center, surrounded by working families celebrating their children's futures, I finally understood the purpose behind all those years of invisible service. The money I'd unexpectedly received wasn't compensation for past suffering, it was seed capital for preventing future suffering. The Castile family faded into memory like a difficult chapter in a book I'd finally finished reading. I heard through Sarah that Victoria and Harrison had hired a series of housekeepers who never lasted more than a few months. Without me to absorb their frustrations and manage their emotional needs, they were forced to confront the reality of their own behavior. Marcus had lost a significant amount of money in a cryptocurrency investment that went bad, and Harrison's portfolio had taken hits due to market volatility and poor decision-making. Their vast fortune remained substantial, but their sense of financial invincibility had been shaken by forces beyond their control. I felt no satisfaction in their setbacks, just the neutral acknowledgement that money without wisdom or character offers limited protection against life's uncertainties. They had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between wealth and security, between being valuable and being valued, between serving others and serving yourself. My own financial situation stabilized through careful management and modest living. The investment account that had accidentally become mine continued to grow through conservative choices and compound interest. I would never be wealthy in the Castile sense, but I had enough to live comfortably, support my daughter's dreams, fund our scholarship foundation, and plan for an old age that wouldn't be spent in anyone's basement. More importantly, I had relationships that fed my soul rather than depleting it. Carmen and I had evolved from strangers sharing DNA into genuine friends who happened to be mother and daughter. My volunteer work connected me to a community of people who saw and appreciated my contributions. Even my renewed friendship with Sarah had become something authentic, based on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. On my 60th birthday, Carmen threw me a party in our backyard, my first real birthday celebration since childhood. The guests included neighbors, fellow volunteers, scholarship recipients, and Sarah, who had flown down from Chicago with her 6-month-old daughter. "This is for you, Gloria," Sarah said, handing me a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures from my years with her family. Not the formal portraits where I'd been excluded, but candid shots where I appeared in the background, caring for children, preparing meals, maintaining the home that had sheltered all of us. "I found these in Mom's closets," Sarah explained. "She never displayed them, but she kept them. I think she knew, even then, that you were the heart of our household. We just didn't know how to acknowledge it." Looking through those photographs, I saw my younger self with new eyes. The woman in those pictures wasn't invisible or worthless. She was strong, dedicated, essential. She had been loving other people's children with fierce devotion while missing her own daughter's childhood. She had been keeping a mansion running smoothly while neglecting her own needs for comfort and recognition. She had been surviving circumstances that would have broken weaker spirits, laying the foundation for the freedom and joy I now experience daily. "Thank you for taking care of us," Sarah whispered as I turned the pages. "And thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." That night, after the guests had gone home and Carmen had fallen asleep in her own bedroom, I sat on my front porch and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. The cicadas sang in the live oak trees, neighbors called goodnight to each other across yard fences, and the summer air felt soft against my skin. I had learned that happiness isn't the absence of hardship, it's the presence of choice. For 16 years in Chicago, I had been trapped by circumstances and conditioning that convinced me I deserved nothing better than invisibility and basement rooms. But discovering my own worth had opened doors I hadn't even known existed. I had learned that family isn't just about blood or proximity. It's about people who see your full humanity and love what they see. The Castiles had shared their house with me, but never their hearts. Carmen, Sarah, Mario, my fellow volunteers. These people had created actual intimacy based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to change directions, to choose courage over comfort, to prioritize relationships over security. At 58, I had remade my entire life around love instead of duty, connection instead of service, authentic value instead of imposed invisibility. The stars were brilliant that night, unpolluted by the light pollution I'd grown accustomed to in Chicago. I made a wish on the brightest star I could find, not for myself, but for every woman who was at this moment scrubbing someone else's floors while dreaming of a life that honored her full worth. You might be that woman right now, wherever you're watching this, whatever time it is in your corner of the world. You might be cleaning houses or caring for children or serving families who take your dedication for granted. You might be sending money to relatives while struggling to pay your own bills, sacrificing your dreams to fund other people's comfort. If that's you, I want you to know something that took me 16 years to learn. You are not invisible. Your worth is not determined by other people's recognition. Your life can change direction at any age, in any circumstance, if you have the courage to believe you deserve better. Start small. Save a few dollars for yourself. Take a walk in a park just for pleasure. Call someone who loves you for who you are, not what you provide. Look in the mirror and speak to yourself with the kindness you show others. You have more power than you realize, more options than your circumstances suggest, more value than anyone has ever taught you to claim. The woman who left New Orleans 21 years ago believed she had no choices except service or starvation. The woman who returned from Chicago had learned that dignity and authentic relationships are worth more than security built on self-denial. Both women were me. Both women were necessary. The suffering taught me compassion. The liberation taught me joy. Together, they created a life that feels genuinely mine. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life working for people who never truly see you? Have you sacrificed your own dreams to fund other people's comfort, wondering if your dedication will ever be appreciated or reciprocated? Share your story in the comments below, not the whole painful truth if it's too private, but just enough to let other women know they're not alone in their struggles. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe. It helps this message reach another woman who works with dedication and heart, another person who needs to hear that their worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special podcast filled with stories just as moving as this one. You can find it here by clicking on the left. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the heart. Remember, you are seen, you are valued, and you are worthy of a life that honors your full humanity. I'll see you in the next story.